The announcement of general conscription is Moscow's reaction to the high personnel losses incurred in Ukraine. Since February, the Russians have lost over 55,000 soldiers there. The detailed decree on the declaration of partial mobilization in the Russian Federation, published today by the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, brings Russia into a new phase of the war in Ukraine. Decree on the declaration of partial mobilization in the Russian Federation. By this decree, I decide. Partial mobilization in the Russian Federation has been enforced since the 21st of September 2022. The necessary measures are taken to meet the needs of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, other troops, formations and military bodies during the period of the partial mobilization. It guarantees for military service for the mobilization of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in the number and on the date specified by the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. The Kremlin plans to join the occupied territories of Ukraine to Russia under a referendum which is to be held this week. According to experts from the United States Institute of War Studies, Moscow is planning to falsify the voting results so that attempts by Ukrainians to regain the lost territories will be treated as an attack on Russia. Moreover, the support of Kiev by Western partners will be considered an attack on Russia's sovereignty. If the territorial integrity of Russia is threatened, then we will undoubtedly use all available means to protect our country and our citizens. This is not a bluff, and those who try to blackmail us with nuclear weapons should know that such a policy can also turn against them. Even though the conscription of another 300,000 soldiers to the Russian army poses a threat to independent Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky is still cool-headed. Publishing this information is deliberate to cause chaos. Are there some that were not known to us before? My position is clear and unchanging. We need military support for our armed forces, and we appreciate the help our partners have provided to us so far. The announcement of mobilization caused anxiety among Russians. Within a few minutes, all air tickets were purchased for connections from Moscow to Armenia, Turkey and Georgia. We don't hear of there being any politicians in Russia who obviously have any power to carry out such an idea of ending this war. This morning, Russian activists announced a protest against recruitment. The organisers called on the Russians to demonstrate in all cities of the country. The action will start at 7 p.m. local time. Mobilization is like pregnancy. You cannot be partially in it. So we have a mobilization of reservists in Russia. Industrial mobilization has already taken place. Only in terms of losses, the Russians crossed the Rubicon. Too little, too late. It seems to me that now Russia is indeed going to war. 300,000 people is more than were stationed at the border with Ukraine on the 24th of February. Meanwhile, yesterday, during the United Nations General Assembly in New York, President Andrzej Duda drew attention to the scale of Russian terror that Ukrainians are facing. According to the President, Moscow discouraged many business partners from any kind of business by causing the war in Ukraine. There is no more room for business as usual with Russia. The days of business as usual are definitely over. They were ended by Russia through its bestial aggression against Ukraine, through its violation of the principles of international law, through its disregard for human beings and for human life. The war crimes committed by the Russians during the invasion of Ukraine are yet another point that aggravates the already damaged diplomatic relations with Moscow. Top world leaders commented on the current events in Ukraine during yesterday's United Nations General Assembly. If we want this war to end, we cannot remain indifferent. Putin will give up his military actions and his imperialist ambitions only when he realizes that he will not be able to win. He not only destroys Ukraine, but also ruins his own country. We will not accept any peace dictated by Russia. The invasion of Ukraine violates the values and rules on which, for decades, international security and the civil coexistence between countries have rested. We thought we would no longer have to witness wars of aggression in Europe. Imperial ambitions, militarism, systematic violations of civil and human rights seemed to belong to the last century. Information about the mobilization of recruits for the Russian army has reached the inhabitants of the regions located on the front line. Our correspondent, Vital Nevelich, is staying in Mykolaiv. Information about mobilization does not impress the inhabitants of Mykolaiv, perhaps because they have already experienced so much. Last week, 440 graves of victims of Russian terror were found in the city of Izium. The accounts of the survivors are harrowing. I spent 2 weeks in prison. At some point they had already stopped beating me. They tortured me with electricity. I had 2 clamps put on my fingers, and with each shock I felt a strong shock. In the past week in the Kharkiv region, as many as 10 Russian execution houses were discovered. Local people were interrogated in the detention centres. The cemetery near Izium shows the aftermath of Russian bestiality.